That's sort of something like that.
Nothing that seems like a good idea anymore.
I'll throw out something. It's kind of an idea. It's maybe using around. It's a philosophical one that we didn't touch on at the beginning of yesterday, and it's probably way too extreme a term for us to really get too deep into. But just for the sake of warming up. Okay, so we were talking about the 3 different roles that a name service has yesterday. We broke it up. There was like a marketing service, content discovery, and then what was the other one? The second one? Yeah, this is a quiz to see if everyone was paying attention. What was it?
Was it property? Or
yeah, property, right. So is it property or is it a marketing tool?
Yeah.
A third one that occurred to me is that it's kind of a user tool. It maybe in some ways belongs to the users who are using the name and hoping to be routed to the thing, as much as they belong to the person who owns the name, is trading it, spotting it, maybe trying to use it as a marketing tool. So in that respect, if we were optimizing for the utility to users who want to have access to a useful name service, then the thing that we're actually optimizing for isn't, well, it's not a marketing tool, it's not, allocation, it's not necessarily tradable, it's more about designating names. And that actually gets really deep into the conflict resolution thing. Like maybe conflict resolution should be like a high priority, for a name system. I'm not saying we should turn the whole thing whole U-turn or something, but a name system could maybe be built where it's trying to prioritize sensible names first rather than market purchasing names.
So it's more of a left-wing view. The name belongs to the community, it doesn't belong to the company, which we didn't touch.
Yeah, we didn't touch on it. So I just
Can I add to that?
Sure.
So from the EPM perspective, we've been looking at ENS as a generic name spacing solution for us. So that's really what it is a generic name spacing application. And in that model, that's very much what it is. The users or the creators of packages are we're assigning package names into the ENS namespace as the resolvable way to get at those packages. And in that model, there's a level of needing them to continue to resolve to the right packages, right? Because that's a really significant attack vector if all of a sudden you redirect people's
You lose dependencies or it happens with MDM sometimes.
I mean, just being able to change where that points to could compromise every code base that uses whatever base level library everybody decides to use.
So first I would say that when I think marketing, I'm really thinking about both the user trying to find something and also someone trying to make something available for the user. Again, you can, and actually you're right, the user thing is the most fundamental one. It could be that the thing that's being found is unique there for someone for their purposes. Right? It could be just for the user. And I'm all about maximizing the user value, and I think sometimes that means not like things immutable. Sometimes that means, having the same thing registered forever just because that's what they expect. But sometimes I think it means finding the best possible thing on the other side of this name for that use case, right? Sometimes, for example, for the software example, you could have, say, if someone could initially upload a version that is actually accidentally malware. They got compromised, right? They maybe want to change it, and they maybe can, right? So just because the owner can't be changed doesn't mean that the actual thing that resolves can't change, right?
We thought about that as well, and how do we deal with malicious packages? What I would like is, in this context, I would love to have a completely immutable ENS namespace that was write only forever with a really strong guarantee. I think that doesn't necessarily have to happen under the .eth namespace because we're talking about special purposes at that point. But and in that same model of how do you deal with malicious things, get rid of them in namespace, well, I say you do that with a layer on top of it.
So if you want to take contracts as an example, then you can use an ENS subdomain that maps, that has its own subdomains that map to contracts.
Yeah.
then you can subdomain off that for versions. So if you want a specific
That's
version
exactly
of contract,
what we're looking to do.
and that makes sense, and you can make that in a new document.
Except for we forget to renew our registration at the end of the year. Which if you go to ethpm.com right now, you'll get a big SSL warning of how good we are. So,
There is an issue of active maintenance, right? I mean, and that's actually a good question for ENS. Should we allow perpetual registrations for critical pieces of the infrastructure?
And the fundamental problem there is that if you get perpetual registration with no intervention required, you also have the opportunity to permanently lose parts of the database because you lose a key.
Yeah.
I mean, could we grant the letter I to immutable?
So I'm still,
Mm.
personally, still very reluctant to use anything that might either become an internet TLD, you know, with the same name.
Oh, no, I mean I.eth.
Right.
Things like that, like,
But honestly, I think that the immutable versus losing the key thing can be solved by allowing other people to help re-register a name, right?
Yeah.
I don't think ideally you should have a name that only one person has the key, and if they lose like the deadline, the name gets lost.
No, absolutely.
Ideally, when we build a permanent register, what I think should happen is that you should have a long date in which you have the opportunity to register, and anyone else could help you. So one example would simply be that you have X ether locked in, and the system says, look, you need to lock 10 more ether inside this to be able to keep using the domain. If that's sort of the
Anybody can do that.
Anybody could do that. So maybe you could have something, you could lose the key, put a bunch of money in it, and then it would be almost like, as long as anyone is using and maybe people are donating to keep that pot going, that should be almost as immutable as you need to.
So that only solves half the problem, though, because the other half is if you lose the key, you can no longer update whatever the key allowed you to update.
Yeah, well, and that's where contract-owned domains and multi-sig, I mean, that's the same logic problem.
I mean, I guess
in that logic, if you're using something where people donate money to keep your money registered, if you lose your key and if you need that key, then people won't be donating your money anymore. My point is, we only care about losing keys when it's a dead service, right? When it's a service nobody is using. If it's a service nobody is using, then nobody is gonna care about donating to try to re-register.
so. You're suggesting really that we don't need immutable namespaces as long as we can build contracts that allow anybody to keep it alive.
With
Is that right?
with a bulletproof guarantee.
Yeah, and an
Which of course
expiration date in case
crypto specializes
you get
in.
lost. So I give like a 10-year expiration date, like basically we can renew it. If someone's lost the keys and they're like, I lost the keys in this account, just like expires.
But, you know, a lost key situation would come under a very similar mechanism to whatever we were talking about yesterday. It's the same practical situation as a dispute resolution mechanism, right? A lost key. There's no antagonism in it. You have to have the same kind of decision-making arbitration process requiring intervention possibly to deal with the loss.
I think that
You could do that.
I would say the difference is that we can potentially register the pieces of what we would consider critical infrastructure beforehand, so we know what they are. A lost key situation could be anyone coming, I've lost my key to my favorite name, can you help me? Whereas if we have pre-registration for the things that matter in some way, shape or form, we can get away with that.
One of the best things about the internet in my mind though is that there is no predefined list of critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like you don't require special approval to get something added to a namespace that makes it more essential than other things.
We give the option, so like you have the option of putting extra data in so that you can basically have extra control in this case of losing a key or something like that.
I mean, you should be able to implement that at the contract level. Like one protection against losing keys having a multi-sig.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think that's like a really good use case for I mean, we're talking about losing keys, like,
Well,
let's just solve the problem for the whole space,
Is
like,
there a way that we in this room can program something that will do this for people?
Well,
Rather than like
you really
expecting
should work
them
for
to
a
be
money
able.
for wallet, right?
I know,
Actually,
everybody.
That's actually a function that a registrar is well placed
No,
to do,
that's where it is.
registering traditional
You know,
contracts.
with, with identity.
I think this is something that you
That's the thing,
kick
that's the thing.
completely
A
out
lot
of the
people-
ENS
that's what a lot of
Yes.
people do.
because other people are solving this right now. Uport is solving this. Uport is solving social key recovery, and
And it's simply the same process as a dispute, but you don't have somebody you dispute with on the other side, you dispute with the arbiters, you prove that
So I
somehow.
worry that expanding a dispute process to
Yeah.
cover lost keys and so on, imposes a lot more load on the dispute resolvers and also opens opportunities for social engineering where there weren't any previously.
Yep.
I think you're right that with the DNS, that's the sort of service that a registrar will provide. But I think that a large focus here is on finding ways to limit what a registrar can do to your name if you're, behaving yourself, basically. So that you can form, iron down contracts on how your name will be done, basically. And that kind of implies stripping away the safety nets, and I guess we just have to accept that.
Well, I mean, like in .ca, right? You have a couple, like .ca is a little more nanny-ish towards registrants than .com. It's not as Wild West, and so there's a lot of, especially, it depends on, you can choose different registrant types. If you're a corporation, you get treated one way. If you're as a personal person, you get treated another way, like your WHOIS data doesn't get displayed. But then you can have an option to say, allow my registrar to be able to make certain operations on my domain without needing me to approve it. Usually email, like a signature. And so you can have those different options to say, on this one domain name, I want to be completely safe, 100%. I'm not going to allow anybody to do anything where you might be microwave. And I want my registrar to be able to do this in case I do this. So you can do it on a per domain basis for contract.
Then you pay a higher fee depending on how much protection you want. I don't know.
My ISP actually lets me pretty clear that I will only ever communicate with them if I give them a two-factor code and that they should provide no recovery mechanism for this. So it's, yeah.